The Grand Hall of Washington, D.C. buzzed with tension. Politicians, reporters, and diplomats filled every seat. Cameras were set, lights burned bright, and the air carried that electric hum that comes before something unforgettable. At the back of the room sat Manny Pacquiao, quiet, composed, dressed in a simple gray suit. He wasn't there as a boxer. He was there as a representative, invited to speak about poverty and leadership. But not everyone in that room respected him for that. Across the stage stood Congresswoman Maxine Waters, a woman known for her fierce rhetoric and cutting remarks. She eyed Manny with a faint smirk, the kind that could slice through confidence. As the moderator opened the floor for discussion, Maxine leaned forward, her voice echoing through the speakers. "Well, look who we have here," she said. "The great boxing legend himself. Tell me, Mr. Pacquiao, when did throwing punches qualify someone to discuss politics?" Laughter rippled through a few corners of the room. Manny didn't react. He simply met her gaze, calm and steady. Maxine continued, enjoying the attention. "Politics isn't about strength, Mr. Pacquiao. It's about intelligence, about understanding systems. You can't solve national issues with boxing gloves." The cameras zoomed in on Manny. The entire room waited for his response. But he didn't rush. He just smiled faintly, as if measuring his next move like a champion waiting for the right moment to strike. Reporters whispered, tension building with every second of his silence. Maxine crossed her arms, smirking wider. "Nothing to say, Mr. Pacquiao? Maybe the ring is more your comfort zone." Manny finally stood up, his movements calm, deliberate. His presence alone shifted the mood, the kind of quiet authority that comes from a lifetime of discipline. The hall fell silent. Every camera turned toward him. He took a deep breath, looked straight at Maxine, and said in a low, steady voice. What Manny said next left the entire room in stunned silence. The air inside the hall felt heavy. Every breath seemed louder than usual. Manny Pacquiao stood slowly, buttoning his coat as he faced the Congresswoman, who had just mocked him in front of hundreds. For a moment, he said nothing. His calmness felt almost unnatural, like the seconds before a bell rings in a title fight. Then in that gentle but confident voice known to millions, he began. "Ma'am," he said, "I may not have your experience in politics, but I understand struggle, I understand hunger, and I understand what it means to fight for people who have nothing." The crowd fell silent. Even those who had laughed a moment ago now listened carefully. He continued, "In my country, politics is not a game of words. It's a battle for survival. I didn't come here to impress anyone. I came here to learn, to share, and to serve." Maxine Waters gave a small, dismissive laugh. "That's touching, Mr. Pacquiao. But emotion doesn't build nations. Policies do. This is Washington, not a motivational stage." A few in the crowd chuckled nervously, unsure which side to take. Manny nodded. "True, ma'am. But without heart, even the best policies mean nothing. Without compassion, intelligence becomes arrogance." The room stirred. The tone of the conversation was shifting, slowly but surely. Maxine leaned on the podium, voice sharpening. "So you think compassion is all it takes to lead a nation?" Manny's reply came steady as stone. "No, ma'am. It takes courage. Courage to admit when you're wrong. Courage to listen when you disagree. And courage to serve instead of rule." The audience reacted audibly this time. A low hum of approval spread through the hall. Cameras flashed. Journalists started scribbling. Waters tried to regain control. "You speak well for someone without political training." Manny smiled slightly. "I didn't get my training from books, ma'am. I got it from life, the hardest teacher of all." He paused, letting the words sink in. When you grow up with nothing, you learn quickly. You learn what justice really means. You learn what hope costs. The Congresswoman's smirk faded just a little. Manny's tone deepened. "I've stood in arenas with thousands of people screaming for blood. But the loudest fight I've ever faced was the silence of a hungry child. That silence taught me more about leadership than any textbook." The room was utterly still. Even the cameras seemed quieter, their operators frozen, drawn into the moment. Waters crossed her arms. So, what exactly are you trying to say, Mr. Pacquiao? Manny looked at her directly. That titles don't define leaders. Actions do. And no matter how powerful we are, we all answer to the same judge at the end of the day. Conscience. That line hit the crowd like thunder. Gasps, applause, even a few shouts of agreement. Waters straightened her notes, clearly flustered now. Well, perhaps you should try running for office in your own country before giving lectures here. Manny replied softly. I already did, ma'am. And I learned that serving people is not about power, it's about sacrifice. You could feel it. The entire hall was on edge. The same Congresswoman who had started the exchange with confidence now seemed to struggle for words. Reporters leaned forward. Every phone in the audience was recording. Clips were already flying across social media. Titles forming before the event was even over. Manny Pacquiao humiliates Congresswoman with wisdom, not anger. Boxer teaches Washington a lesson in respect. Still, Manny didn't gloat. He stood quietly, hands clasped, eyes calm. He ended his response with a tone that silenced the last whisper in the room. I didn't come here to win an argument, he said. I came here to remind us all that humility is not weakness. It's strength under control. Applause broke out. First a few claps and then a wave. It grew louder and louder until the entire hall was standing. Maxine Waters forced a polite smile, her earlier smirk gone. She nodded slightly but avoided his gaze. Manny bowed respectfully toward her and the audience, then sat back down as the moderator tried to regain order. It was too late. The moment had already become history. People would talk about it for days, replaying his words, dissecting every second of the calm defiance he showed under pressure. Outside, reporters were already waiting for interviews. Inside, one thought echoed through the minds of everyone present. This wasn't just a boxer. This was a man who carried the spirit of a nation. Have you ever seen someone stay calm under pressure and turn humiliation into respect? Comment, yes, if you have, and tell us which country you're watching from. The applause finally began to fade, but the tension didn't. Everyone could feel it. Something had shifted in that room. The air had changed. Congresswoman Maxine Waters straightened her papers, trying to regain her authority. Her voice cut through the noise like a blade. Well, she said sharply, this isn't a popularity contest, Mr. Pacquiao. We are here to discuss global policy, not emotional storytelling. A few nervous laughs scattered across the hall, but no one dared interrupt. Manny sat calmly, hands folded, his expression unreadable. Waters pressed on, louder now, her tone filled with frustration. You might impress people with charm and humility, but that doesn't make you qualified to lecture lawmakers. Manny stood again, not quickly, but with the quiet strength of someone who's been underestimated his whole life. He adjusted his tie and looked straight at her. His words came slow, deliberate like carefully thrown punches. Ma'am, you're right. I'm not a lawmaker in your country, he said. But I know what it means to fight for one. I know what it means to earn every single opportunity with sweat, not privilege. A few heads in the audience nodded. Someone whispered, he's not backing down. Waters crossed her arms. You think you're the only one who's worked hard? I've spent decades fighting for justice, Manny interrupted, gently but firmly. Then we are not so different, ma'am. But justice is not about who shouts the loudest, it's about who listens the longest. That line hit the audience like a lightning strike. Gasps, murmurs, phones recording. The moderator tried to step. And let's move on, please. But the hall was already too deep into the moment. Waters leaned forward, visibly irritated. You seem to think your fame gives you wisdom. You're being romantic about politics, Mr. Pacquiao. Manny shook his head slightly. No, ma'am. I'm being human about it. A ripple of applause broke out, small at first, then spreading through the hall again. Waters' eyes narrowed. Do you know how difficult it is to manage power, to run a government, to keep people in line? Manny met her gaze. His eyes were calm, steady, but behind them burned something powerful. Yes, he said quietly. Because I've seen power destroy people who forget where they came from. The words hung in the air like smoke. No one spoke. Even the moderator froze. Manny continued, his voice rising slightly. I grew up with nothing, no shoes, no food, no security. I slept on the streets. But even then I believed in hope. I didn't need power to change lives, I needed compassion. You could almost hear the cameras clicking faster. Reporters whispered to one another. Someone near the front row muttered, "He's turning this entire hearing into a masterclass." Waters tried to interject, but Manny didn't stop. He took one step forward, and the tone of the room changed completely. "You know, ma'am," he said, "in boxing, the first thing you learn is respect. Not for yourself, but for your opponent. Because without respect, every fight becomes chaos. Maybe politics isn't so different." A stunned silence filled the hall. Even Maxine Waters blinked, speechless for a moment. Manny didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult her. But his composure, his quiet truth, felt heavier than any argument. The crowd started applauding again. This time louder, longer. Waters shifted uncomfortably, gripping her notes, clearly struggling to hold her ground. But Manny wasn't done yet. He looked at her one last time and said, "I didn't come here to win debates. I came here to remind people that leadership isn't about ego. It's about empathy." That single sentence broke whatever defense she had left. The room erupted in a standing ovation. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions and social media exploded within minutes. Maxine Waters stood still, stunned. Her earlier confidence had turned into something else. Reflection, maybe even respect. But Manny? He simply bowed slightly and sat down again, quiet as ever. No gloating, no arrogance. Just calm, because the truth didn't need to shout. It had already won. For a few long seconds, the hall remained silent after Manny Pacquiao's last words. The air felt frozen in time. Even the clicking of cameras had stopped. Then slowly murmurs began to spread. Someone in the back whispered, "Wait. That's not just a guest speaker, and that's Manny Pacquiao, the world champion." Another voice followed. "The boxer from the Philippines? The one who became a senator?" Within moments, the whisper grew into a wave rippling through the entire audience. Phones came out. Fingers flew across screens. Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook began lighting up with posts and live videos. Maxine Waters clashes with Manny Pacquiao in D.C. Boxing legend schools Congresswoman with grace. Respect over arrogance. Manny's words go viral. Maxine Waters stood rigid at the podium, trying to hide the sudden shift in energy. Just minutes ago, she had full control of the room. Now all eyes had turned toward the quiet man she'd tried to embarrass. Manny stayed seated, calm as ever. He wasn't smiling, but his presence radiated something powerful. Dignity. A young journalist in the front row whispered to her cameraman, "That man built schools in poor provinces. He gave away half his fortune. He's not just a fighter, he's a humanitarian." Another reporter added softly, "He's literally one of the most respected athletes in the world," and she tried to mock him like a nobody. The moderator cleared his throat nervously. Let's take a short break," he said, trying to ease the tension. But the audience wasn't interested in a break. They wanted more. Someone stood up and clapped. Then another. Then dozens more. In seconds, the room was on its feet again, giving Manny Pacquiao a standing ovation that thundered through the hall. The sound filled the space like a storm, echoing off marble walls, drowning out every other noise. Waters tried to speak, but her voice was lost in the roar. Her earlier smirk had vanished, replaced by a tight, uneasy smile. Manny didn't gloat. He simply stood, bowed politely to the audience, and gestured for everyone to sit. The applause slowly died down, leaving a heavy hush behind. He looked around the hall, his tone gentle but clear. "I thank you all for your kindness," he said. "But please, I don't deserve applause for speaking the truth. The truth belongs to everyone." That single line sent chills down spines. It wasn't arrogance. It was authenticity. And that's what made it hit harder than any punch. A few rows back, a foreign policy analyst whispered. He just disarmed the entire room without raising his voice. Maxine Waters stood motionless. Her notes trembled slightly in her hands. The camera zoomed in on her face, an expression caught between disbelief and embarrassment. The moderator hesitated, then turned to Manny. Mr. Pacquiao, would you like to continue your statement? Manny nodded. Just one thing, he said softly. He turned toward the Congresswoman, not with anger, but with deep calm. Ma'am, you said politics isn't about emotions. But maybe that's why so many people lose faith in it. Because somewhere along the way we forgot that leadership isn't about position, it's about compassion. The words rolled through the hall like thunderclouds. The audience didn't dare move. Manny continued, I didn't come here to argue or to win attention. I came because I believe dialogue can unite us if we listen. He looked out over the crowd, his voice steady and humble. I may not have the perfect English or the highest degree, but I have seen hunger. I have seen pain, and I have learned that sometimes the people with the least teach us the most. A hush fell over the audience and a silence that wasn't empty, but heavy with respect. Even Maxine Waters, for the first time, seemed to soften. Her expression changed, not pride, not defiance, but quiet realization. Someone from the media whispered, She knows she lost this one. When Manny finished, he bowed again and sat down. The audience erupted once more. Not the forced clapping of politics, but the heartfelt applause of people witnessing humility win over arrogance. The cameras flashed. Clips hit social media instantly. Within minutes, the world began watching. And outside that hall, on every screen and every platform, people repeated the same sentence over and over again. Maxine Waters tried to humiliate Manny Pacquiao, but he taught her a lesson in grace. If you were in that audience, would you have stood and clapped for Manny, or stayed silent? Comment your answer below and tell us which country you're watching from. The applause faded again, leaving only the faint hum of cameras recording. Everyone's eyes stayed locked on Manny Pacquiao, the man who had turned a moment of humiliation into one of history's most powerful exchanges. But the confrontation wasn't over. Congresswoman Maxine Waters, regaining her composure, adjusted her microphone. Her pride wouldn't let her back down completely. Well, she said, her voice carefully measured, you speak with passion, Mr. Pacquiao. I'll give you that. But politics is not a sermon. It's a battlefield of minds, not hearts. You can't survive here with feelings and faith. The tone was sharp, but the audience could hear the cracks. The once commanding voice of the Congresswoman now carried hesitation. Manny looked at her quietly for a moment, not with anger, but with empathy. Then he stood again. His chair creaked softly in the silence. Ma'am, he said calmly, I know the battlefield very well. I've fought and won my whole life. The difference is, in my fights, I can see my opponent. In politics, sometimes you fight enemies you can't even see. A ripple of laughter and gasps swept through the room. Even some officials on the panel smiled, unable to hide their admiration. Maxine crossed her arms tightly. So what's your point, Mr. Pacquiao? That politicians are cowards? Manny shook his head gently. No, ma'am. My point is that true strength is not proven by how loud we speak, but how well we listen. He paused, looking around the hall, his voice rising just slightly. You can be powerful, you can be rich, you can have every title before your name, but if you lose respect for others, you've already lost something greater than power. The audience leaned forward. Some even forgot to blink. The hall was completely silent except for Manny's voice echoing through the speakers. When I was young, he continued, I was told I'd never be more than a poor boy from the streets. I sold bread just to survive. But I learned something valuable. Humility doesn't make you small. It makes you unbreakable. Every word hit with the weight of experience. His tone wasn't angry. It was sincere, raw, and deeply human. He looked directly at Maxine Waters again. You said politics is not about feelings, but feelings are what make us human. Compassion is not weakness. It's the highest form of strength. Waters stayed silent this time. Her earlier confidence had melted into contemplation. Manny continued, his voice steady but firm. I've met presidents, kings, and leaders. Some were wise, some were proud, but the ones who made a difference were those who never forgot what it's like to be ordinary. The moderator lowered his papers, mesmerized. The audience hung on every word. Manny's eyes scanned the room as he delivered his final message, the knockout punch that didn't need fists. Respect, he said slowly, is not given by position. It's earned by how you treat people when you think you don't need them. A heavy silence fell, and then an eruption. The audience rose again, clapping louder than before. It wasn't polite applause. It was thunder. People stood cheering, shouting his name. Even reporters were clapping while trying to film the moment. Maxine Waters lowered her eyes, visibly moved but too proud to show it. Still, the respect in the room had shifted completely. It belonged to Manny now. Manny nodded politely, not basking in the attention but humbly accepting it. He gestured for silence once more and spoke softly into the mic. "I don't come here as a boxer or a politician," he said. "I come as a man who believes that dignity is greater than pride, and humility will always defeat arrogance." The crowd roared again, the cameras flashing nonstop. Social media had already exploded. Within minutes, clips were being shared across platforms under one headline: Manny Pacquiao silences Maxine Waters with class and courage. In the corner of the hall, a young journalist whispered to his colleague, "That wasn't a debate. That was history." And as Manny sat down for the last time, he looked peaceful, calm, centered, unshaken. He had spoken his truth without shouting, fought without striking, and won without humiliating anyone. Because true power, as the world was now witnessing, doesn't come from domination, right? It comes from dignity. The echoes of applause still thundered through the marble walls of the hall. Manny Pacquiao sat quietly, head bowed, while the audience around him buzzed with energy. It was as if the entire room had been struck by a wave of truth they couldn't unhear. At the front, Congresswoman Maxine Waters shuffled her notes, trying to reclaim composure. Her earlier arrogance had drained away, replaced by an awkward stiffness. Cameras focused on her face. She could feel the heat of the lenses. Then, from the side of the stage, another figure stepped forward. A tall man in a navy suit, Congressman James Carter, one of the most respected members of the committee. Known for his sharp mind and balanced views, Carter had been silent through the entire exchange. Now all eyes turned as he approached the microphone. "Madam Chair," he said politely, addressing Waters, "if I may, I think we've all witnessed something far greater than a policy discussion today." Waters froze. "Congressman Carter," she began, trying to interrupt, but he continued calmly. He turned toward Manny. "Mr. Pacquiao, I know who you are, and I know what you've done. You're not just a boxer. You're a man who came from nothing and gave hope to millions. You've built homes for the poor, funded scholarships, hospitals, relief programs. You are the embodiment of what leadership truly means." The room stirred. Journalists scribbled furiously. A few nodded in agreement. Carter continued, his voice deep and steady. "Madam Chair, with all due respect, I think humility is not a weakness. What we saw today was a lesson, one that this institution could stand to remember." A low murmur of agreement swept the hall. Waters blinked, her lips parting slightly but no words coming out. Carter faced Manny again. "Sir, your words carried more power than 1,000 speeches. You reminded us that politics without heart is nothing but noise." Manny stood, bowing slightly. "Thank you, sir. I didn't mean to cause division. I only wanted to speak truth," Carter smiled. "And you did, with grace." Applause filled the room again, this time led by Carter himself. Members of the audience, officials, staffers, and guests rose to their feet. Even those who had sided with Waters earlier now clapped, unable to resist the tidal wave of respect. Waters remained seated, her face tight. For the first time in her career, she wasn't the one commanding the room. She was being watched. The cameras panned across her expression as the crowd rose around Manny, chanting softly, "Respect. Respect." Manny raised his hands gently, signaling for calm. When the hall fell silent again, he looked toward Waters and spoke softly. "Ma'am," he said, "I want to thank you, because without confrontation, there can be no understanding. Sometimes the hardest lessons come wrapped in criticism, and that's okay." The humility in his voice struck deeper than any argument could. Even Waters couldn't hide the faint flicker of surprise in her eyes. Manny continued, "I don't hold anything against you. I know your fight for justice has inspired many, but I hope we never forget that respect must be the foundation of justice, not its casualty." For a moment, Waters looked away, down at her notes, then back up. Her lips trembled slightly. "Mr. Pacquiao," she said slowly, "perhaps I was too quick to judge." A hush fell over the room. Even Carter looked impressed. Manny smiled humbly. We all make judgments, ma'am. But what defines us is how we correct them. The hall burst into applause once again. Not the roar of a crowd this time, but the slow, sincere clapping of people moved by integrity. Waters sighed softly and nodded once. "Well, Mr. Pacquiao," she said, "you certainly live up to your reputation." Manny bowed deeply. "Thank you, ma'am. I'm not perfect. I just try to lead with the same values I learned from the people who believed in me: faith, humility, and respect." Reporters scrambled to push their mics forward, capturing every line. The entire exchange was now trending across social media under one banner: Pacquiao's Waters, the moment humility won. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Congressman Carter shook Manny's hand firmly. "You didn't just win an argument today," he said quietly. "You reminded us all why integrity matters." Manny smiled modestly. "If even one person in this room remembers to lead with respect, then it was worth it." Outside the hall, reporters surrounded him, shouting questions, flashes blinding. But Manny only said one thing before leaving the building. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone. I'm here to remind the world, true strength is measured by grace under fire." That quote spread like wildfire. Within an hour, it was plastered across every major news outlet, accompanied by one defining image: Manny Pacquiao standing tall, calm, and unshaken, while Maxine Waters sat in humbled silence behind him. The tables had turned completely, and as the world watched, it became clear. The man they once mocked as just a boxer had taught an entire room of politicians what true leadership looks like. Do you think Maxine Waters learned a valuable lesson that day? Should Manny's calmness be taught to every leader in the world? Comment your answer below and type respect if you agree with his message. By the next morning, Washington, D.C. woke up to a storm, not of politics but of truth. The video of Manny Pacquiao's calm but powerful exchange with Congresswoman Maxine Waters had spread like wildfire. What began as a heated moment inside a quiet policy hall had exploded into a global phenomenon. Clips flooded social media, TikTok edits, YouTube reaction videos, Twitter threads, Facebook shares, all carrying one headline: Manny Pacquiao shuts down arrogance with pure class. Within hours, it had over 50 million views. News anchors replayed the footage on loop. Podcasters debated it. Even politicians across different countries commented on how a single man's humility could disarm hostility so completely. On television, one anchor summed it up perfectly. It wasn't just a political moment, it was a masterclass in grace. Manny Pacquiao showed the world that calmness can be louder than confrontation. Meanwhile, inside her office, Maxine Waters sat alone, the glow of the viral clip reflecting off her computer screen. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Messages, interviews, statements. Her staff had advised her to make a public apology, but pride is a difficult thing to swallow. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly, replaying Manny's words in her mind. Respect is not given by position. It's earned by how you treat people when you think you don't need them. For the first time in a long time, Maxine didn't feel like a leader. She felt like a student. Across the city, Manny Pacquiao was sitting in a quiet hotel room. No entourage, no celebration, just silence, a cup of coffee, and his thoughts. He scrolled through the overwhelming messages of support, from fans, world leaders, even celebrities. But he didn't smile for the fame or praise. Instead, he whispered a short prayer of gratitude. His phone rang. It was Congressman James Carter. "Manny," Carter said warmly, "the committee has issued a statement. They're reviewing how members conduct themselves during hearings. You've started a conversation we all needed." Manny's voice was calm as ever. "I didn't want to start a fight, sir. I just wanted to remind us all. We're supposed to serve, not rule." Carter chuckled. "That's exactly why people respect you." Later that evening, Manny agreed to address the public. Cameras gathered outside his hotel, a sea of reporters waiting for his words. When he stepped out, he wasn't surrounded by guards or handlers. Just his quiet presence commanded the entire crowd's respect. He spoke into the microphones, voice steady and humble. "I've seen the video," he began, "and I've seen the reactions. But this is not about embarrassing anyone. It's about reflecting on how we treat each other no matter who we are." He paused, glancing at the cameras, his tone deepening. "When I was poor, people ignored me. When I became a champion, people listened. But I learned something important. The measure of a person's worth is not in their title, but in their heart. The crowd fell completely silent. He continued, "We live in a world where shouting has become more common than listening, where people want to win arguments instead of understanding others. But respect," he said, pressing his hand to his chest, "is the real victory." Applause erupted from the reporters. Even through their lenses and deadlines, they felt the weight of his words. Manny smiled gently. "So I want to say this, to young people watching, to leaders everywhere. You don't need anger to be strong. You don't need arrogance to be right. You only need respect, courage, and humility." He bowed slightly and turned to leave, but one reporter called out, "Mr. Pacquiao, what would you say to Congresswoman Waters now?" Manny stopped, looked back, and said softly, "I would say thank you. Because sometimes the greatest lessons come from those who challenge us the most." That line hit the internet like lightning. Within minutes, "Dark Thank You Maxine" was trending, not as mockery, but as a symbol of turning negativity into wisdom. As the sun set over DC, TV screens around the world replayed Manny's final statement. His calm face, his humble tone, and it wasn't politics anymore. It was principle. By nightfall, major headlines read, "Pacquiao's grace sparks global debate on respect and leadership. From ring to Congress, the champ teaches the world a lesson in dignity." Even his critics applaud Pacquiao's poise. Days later, Maxine Waters herself released a public statement. It wasn't an apology in words, but it carried humility. "I've learned that sometimes strength is not about speaking louder, it's about knowing when to listen." Mr. Pacquiao reminded me of that truth. That single acknowledgement ended the feud, turning what began as confrontation into one of the most talked about moments of mutual respect in modern politics. Weeks later, Manny returned home, greeted by thousands cheering his name, but as always he remained grounded. When asked how he felt about being a global symbol again, he smiled and said, "I'm just happy people are talking about respect. That's all that matters." And that perhaps was the greatest knockout of all. Not in the ring, but in the world's heart. If you believe in respect, humility, and equality, type respect in the comments below. And tell us which country you're watching from, because Manny's message belongs to everyone.